do here.
Okay, I will go ahead and get us started here. I know we have a few people still connecting and coming in, and we expect that throughout these meetings that people will be popping in and out. So welcome to Creating a Grief Altar with Nancy Gruskay. She was a Waldorf educator for over 30 years before training to do this work as a certified Mindful Grieving Facilitator through the Center of Somatic Grieving and with the Grief Support Network. She is a lead teacher in the youth programming, and for me, a dear friend, mentor, and colleague. So thank you so much, Nancy, for being here today and offering this beautiful workshop on altars. I would like to offer the quick reminders of our guidelines and rules, I guess, for these spaces. These spaces are meant to be brave, safe spaces, free of judgment and any hatred. So please use the chat boxes appropriately. They are not meant for crosstalk. And if anyone is abusing them, please know that we are keeping this safe space and we will be removing them from the summit. We do ask that you all remain muted throughout these sessions. And excuse me, I'm losing my voice. Nancy will be posing some questions to the group, so please feel free to answer that in the chat box. And if you have any questions, throw those questions in the chat box as well, and I'll be moderating those questions. I believe that is all on my end. One more thing. Feel free to nourish yourselves and take care of yourselves in whatever way you need to throughout not only this session, but all of the sessions. That can be turning your camera on or off, grabbing food, water, using the restroom, laying down, sitting up, walking around, whatever you have to do to take care of yourselves, please do so. And I believe Nancy is going to want you all to have a journal and writing utensil. So if you don't have one near you, please go ahead and grab that. And Nancy, I will pass it over to you. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I'm really honored to be here at this summit and sharing with you all how I came to this work and how I have used and continue to use altars, and in particular, the altar that is behind me that I'll show you more closely in a little while. But before we begin, I'm going to light the candle. And if everyone just takes a moment to go inside, maybe think about why you came here, or who in your heart you're bringing with you, you're holding, and we will light this candle. And I'm lighting this candle for many people that I've lost in my life, and all those who could benefit from a little added light or support as we enter our time together. So as Sarah said, I was a teacher for over 30 years. And during the last several years, of teaching. I lost my mother, my sister, my father, my brother-in-law, and my father-in-law in a very short period of time. And I, like so many of us, just kept moving forward, just kept teaching, just had to and wanted to and needed to parent my children. But I neglected to care for myself. I neglected to have the time and the space to really drop in to what it meant to be someone who's grieving. And finding the Grief Support Network was a lifeline for me, where I found a space, a place, beloved teachers who honored me and who saw me for who I was, and also honored the grief that I was carrying. And I didn't have to pretend I was fine, which was hard because in most spaces, that's what people expected, that I was fine and that I would just move forward with my life. And so during this time of deep grief, I found that if I did not create a container for my grief, if I did not create a place for me to really drop in, then my grief would emerge or spill out or overflow in places where maybe it wasn't so safe, in places where people didn't know how to hold me, or in places where people expected me to be done with my grief. And so what I began to think about was, what do I need in order to create this container for myself? And for those of you who were in the yoga with Wendy, she spoke about creating a container in our own body when we were doing the forward fold and really feeling this chest region connecting with our thighs. And I took that image of creating a container and began to think about and do some research about what do other cultures do to honor their grief, to not put it aside, but to actually have a place for it. And I, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, I read about the Taj Mahal and how that was created as this temple of honor and memorial. I read about in ancient Greece and in ancient Egypt and in ancient Rome, these cultures that have created these gigantic altars to honor the dead. And of course, the Lincoln Memorial is a representation in our country. And then, as we know, when tragedies happen, which unfortunately they just continue, that people gather with flowers and stuffed animals and basketballs, with the case of Kobe Bryant, or just many different ways so that people can gather in community. But I felt like it was really important for me to create a place for myself. And this place would be for me a place where I could dedicate time each day, dedicate time to go and sit at my altar and to cry if I wanted to talk. This altar is dedicated to my sister, and sometimes I would just go and talk to her, or I would meditate or sing, listen to music that she and I loved, read poetry. And over time, what I found was that even though I would often sit there and begin to cry, as time went on and the loss was not quite as fresh, I began to gain comfort from sitting with her. And I felt like I was really sitting with her, some of the things that she and I loved to do together, some of the things she made for me, of course, her beautiful picture. And it became not only a container, but a place, a dedicated place of healing, a dedicated place of remembrance. And over time, what I also started to think about, and it's some of the things that I'm going to pose to you all, is I started to think about what were the ways that my sister left for me, for her children, for the students that she taught. She was an educator as well. What were the things that she left that perhaps I could carry forth? And how could I remember that and represent that on my altar? And how could I begin to offer that as a way of healing, as a way of tending to my grief? And then as I further explored that, I began to realize that, yes, my grief altar was a touchstone for me, but that I could also carry my grief altar with me. And my sister and I love to spend time in nature. And as I'm speaking, perhaps you're beginning to ponder what you loved to do with the person you are grieving. What was something that you might have imagined doing together? What brought you joy? What are the things that you're missing? And one of the things that my sister and I loved to do was be in nature. And I spend a lot of time in nature, and we especially love to be at the ocean together. And since she's died, I have spent a fair amount of time at the ocean. And what I've noticed is it's gone from this place of yearning to be with her to actually this place where I feel her with me, experiencing what I'm experiencing. And I have had this newly awakened connection to seeing through her eyes. And I think that this has been cultivated and fostered through the time that I have sat at the grief altar. Early on, after she had passed away, I decided to leave my job. I just felt like it was time for me to do something to give back the support that I had received and continue to receive from the Grief Support Network. And I remember sitting at the altar, looking at my sister, looking at this beautiful necklace that she had given me, reading the poem that she had chosen for us to read at her memorial service, looking at the deck of cards, because she and I used to love playing cards together. And I had this deep yearning inside. I'm leaving my job after 30 years. No one but my sister could understand the depth of that impact on my life. I really need to hear from her. I need to hear her acknowledge and honor where I have been and what I have done. And as I sat at the grief altar, all of a sudden, I was moved to get my journal. And I thought when I sat there that I was going to be writing a letter to my sister, that I was going to be letting her know all the things that I was experiencing and feeling and struggling with. And instead, I just said out loud, "Oh, Sue, I need you. I need to hear from you." And then I picked up the pen and I began to write. And I was really blown away by what happened. Instead of me writing to myself, she was writing me a letter. Now, you could say, of course, that it was coming from me, but I believe, and I continue to believe because I've done this many times since then, that if I get really quiet, if I tune in at my altar, at the altar dedicated to you, that I can hear her and I can gain the clarity, the wisdom, the comfort, the peace that I need to take the next step. And I will assure you, it's been a lot of years that I have had these losses, starting with 9 years ago and continuing up till several years ago. And it doesn't go away. I miss her every day. I'm wearing her hat because it makes me think of her and it makes me smile. And yet, when I sit in front of the grief altar, somehow this act of being with is such a healing presence for me. I think for those of us who are experiencing loss, we tend to conform to what our society expects, that we will move forward or move on or move past. And so we get busy, or we parent our children, or we go to work, or we numb ourselves, or we hide. And we don't take the time, we don't allow ourselves the opportunity to be with ourselves. So for me, having this dedicated, concrete representation of something that is not physical is always a balm for me. Do I know what will come when I sit there? No. Do I have an agenda? No. Sometimes I feel like a toddler kicking and screaming as I sit in front of the altar and think about what I don't have. Sometimes I feel like a wise woman who is holding this bigger picture for everyone who's grieving. Sometimes I feel like I am that young girl missing her older sister or her mom or her dad. And I just want nurturing and caring. And while they can't on the physical level give it to me, I have found again and again that being with my altar is the way for me to reconnect. Reconnect first with myself, and then reconnect with those who I've lost. So I'm just going to take a moment, take a breath, let you all take in anything that occurs to you. One of the other things I wanted to say is that it's hard to be authentic with people in our lives when we're grieving. People feel like there's a timeline for our grief. And one of the beautiful things that Wendy has taught me and has taught so many of us through the Grief Support Network and now the Center for Somatic Grieving is there's no timeline for our grief. There's no timeline. Yesterday, when I was reading some of the things that we shared at my sister's memorial service, I felt as if my grief was as raw and present as it was on the day that she died. So there's no timeline. And yet, for many of the people in our community, they want it. They want us to move on. They want us to be done. But at my grief altar, I don't have to be done. I can be exactly where I am, show up as messy or as joyful or anything in between that is there. So Why do we create a grief altar? I think we create one. I think we create one for ourselves. I think we create one to acknowledge, to remind ourselves that we are grieving, to serve as a visible representation of our dear person that we are grieving. And yes, of course, you might be grieving a relationship. You might be grieving a tragedy, losing a home. You might be grieving the loss of a relationship. There are so many things that you might be grieving. And I believe you can create a grief altar for that as well. So I don't think it has to be just for a person. That is just what mine is for. I find that having my grief altar allows me to have a place for it and then have a place to leave, so that I have a dedicated time and space to sit there, and then to know that my life is waiting for me, my job is waiting, my children are waiting, my dog is waiting, but that I've somehow created a bit of an opening so that I don't have to feel so armored, so closed, so protected as I go about my daily life. I have found, and I imagine that if you do create an altar, that you will find that it is a living, breathing, changing, evolving representation. When I first created this altar for my sister, I couldn't have her picture on it. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't have it. It was too close. It was too painful. And we created, after my sister died, this beautiful book, which you can't see that it's beautiful, but in it are all the things that people shared at her service, the poems that were read, as well as some writings that people did for her. I looked at this for the first time yesterday, and it was 6 years ago, because I wasn't ready. Now I'm ready to have this on my altar. So our altars can change as our excuse me. So grief lives in my throat, and that happens to me a lot. So please forgive me. Our relationships to our grief changes, our relationship changes, and things that maybe are a little more playful or joyful. For example, this deck of cards, I couldn't have it at first because it was too painful for me. It made me too sad. So I invite you to think about where you are now in relationship to your grief and what might serve you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that I think about as I'm creating an altar. And perhaps you can also share those things that you might imagine you would put on your altar. And then I'm going to give you an opportunity to do some journaling. So for those of us who know about the Day of the Dead, which of course many of us do, which is coming, the altars that are created for the Day of the Dead are very specific, and they have food and drink and candles and water and a mirror and a skull and all these different items to call their dead back to them. What I like to think about is, what are the things that I loved about this beautiful sister of mine? What are the things that I loved about her? And how do I represent those? What are the songs that she loved? And sometimes I sit at my altar and I listen to them. And of course, I cry for sure. What are some readings that we enjoyed together? What are some things that she owned that to me represent her? Well, definitely this hat. What is a symbol or a talisman that reminds me of my sister? So I'll say a little aside about that, which I look for signs and meaning, and that's just something that helps me, and perhaps it might help you as well. When my mother died, we were at the funeral, at the gravesite, and the sky was totally gray. It was a day just like it is here in Colorado. And as the casket was being lowered into the ground, my sister and I were standing on opposite sides, and we both looked up, and these two dragonflies were flying around. Nobody else saw them, and from that day on, my sister and I would see dragonflies either when we were alone or with each other. And the first time we saw them after the funeral, at the same time, we both said, "Hi, Mom." And the dragonfly literally became for us a symbol of our connection with our mother. The week before my sister died, my daughter and I were sitting on a porch in Rhode Island, which was where my sister lived. And a red-tailed hawk landed on the porch about 4 feet away from us. My daughter and I were completely shocked because a red-tailed hawk never would land on that porch. And sure enough, after my sister died, I began to see red-tailed hawks everywhere. And in fact, one of the young students that I was teaching at the time, I had told my 9-year-old, the class who were 9 years old, about this story of seeing the red-tailed hawk. And one day we were going outside in the woods, and this boy said to me, "Miss Gruskay, your sister is up in the tree watching us." And there was a red-tailed hawk there. And so the out of the mouths of babes, and yet the connection was so real. And so for me, I don't have a red-tailed hawk on my altar, but I do have a dragonfly because that was something that my sister and I shared. So symbols such as that often provide comfort, provide nurturing, provide a sense of healing, I would say. So some of the things that I might suggest you think about are maybe a picture of a place that you loved or went to together, or something you might have planned to do together that you never had a chance to do. Of course, flowers, words, images, essential oils, favorite food, favorite drink, photos, something that was meaningful to them. And so many other possibilities, and I'd love also to hear from you all. So I'm wondering, Sarah, if there are things in the chat you'd like to share. And then I want to give just a couple journal prompts if people would like to do a little writing. Sarah?
Yes. Do you want me to read them as they come in?
That would be wonderful.
Okay. I have not received any quite yet.
Okay.
So if you'd like to maybe move forward with the journal questions, I can pop those in as well.
Great. So I'm going to word this a little, well, you'll see. I think how this relates to me of how I created my journal. So this isn't the question yet. For me, I believe that grief breaks your heart so wide open that there's really there's no going back. People talk about the stages of grief. From my perspective, there are only two stages of grief. One is who we were before, and the second is who we are after. Because we're forever changed. Our heart is so wide open. So the questions that I would ponder as I began to sit with how do I want to create a grief journal is, what has the pain of losing whoever or whatever, what has it brought me? What has the pain brought me? And my disclaimer is, maybe at this moment, it hasn't brought you anything. But perhaps what has opened in you because your heart has been so cracked open that you want to remind yourself as you come to the altar? What is something that you think of when you think of your beloved person that actually brings a smile to your face? What is something that gives you a bit of an exhale, a bit even, shall I say, of comfort? And again, my disclaimer is you might not feel this right now, and to hold that then as a possibility for the future. What is something that you want to put on your altar that perhaps is a gift for your beloved, is a gift for the person you lost? What would be a gift for them? And then maybe literally or not, what is a gift that they gave you? And yes, the necklace or the hat or whatever, but maybe more on a non-tangible level. What is the gift of their life that maybe you want to place on your altar? So just some ponderings, and anything else you want to share, anything that you find you would like to put on your altar that might bring you comfort. Have you sat at an altar before? How does it serve you? Has it changed over time? Anything you want to share, I'm really open to hearing from any of you, each of you. And Sarah, I'm seeing some things come in if you want to share.
I will. All right. Abby, who has also lost her sister. Her sister was a graphic designer, and art museums are something that make her smile.
Beautiful, thank you.
We have crystals that were sent. Robin, who lost her friend Lindsay, often visits them by way of butterflies and music.
Beautiful.
These signs are so beautiful and comforting. Rebecca loves having a bowl of salt water on her altar as a representation and container for her saltwater tears, as well as crystals and candles. Dee Dee, who lost her brother, he gave her the spirit of adventure.
Oh,
I want to make sure that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Aine, potentially. You have your hand raised, so I'm actually gonna open it up to you.
My name is said wrong all the time. I pronounce it Aine. In Ireland, it's Anya, but my family pronounced it Aine. Okay, I'm going to try to answer a question because there's so many questions that I want to.
sorry.
I'm sorry, what?
I just said, I know, I'm sorry.
No, I know there's just so many things. I guess what I wanted to say was that I really appreciate the questions that you're asking us to consider about our grief altars, because whether you're someone in this group who doesn't have one or you're someone who has 17, coming together to talk about them and to learn how they can serve us is like such an essential part of the transformation that is possible through grief. And I'm not saying lemonade, right? It's lemons. It's absolutely lemons, you know, but I would be lying if I said that the losses that I have experienced have not made my life what it is, right? So I just wanted to say that I think this thing that you've talked about being in relationship with the person at the altar is something that I've had access to in the way that my altar changes over time, the things that I add to it, but that I hadn't thought about what you shared about the opportunity for that being a space for our loved ones to communicate with us. And most of my losses have been deaths. But the loss that I'm really here for right now is for my teenager who's alive, but who is a different person than they used to be. And I am delighted with who they are. And I didn't realize I was going to lose the one that I did. So this working in relationship and the questions around what are the gifts they have given me is really, really powerful. So I just wanted to say that and say thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Aine, for naming that and articulating that our altars can change and that our relationship with our grief can and does change. And this very real grief about our alive teenagers and how they change. And that is a topic near and dear to my heart. So I would love to further have a conversation with you if you are interested.
100%.
Beautiful. Yep. Thank you. Well, make sure you take down my information at the end. Sarah will put it in the email. Wow. Thank you. Sarah, are there more to share?
There are, if you would like me to keep going.
I'm so moved. So thank you all, really.
Molly has a tablecloth of her Nana's. Played many, many games of cards. So she has pieces of her tablecloth all over her apartment and part of the design on her tattooed on her arm. Molly has altars all over their house and every room with pictures of loved ones, ashes, fun little things that make them smile. Autumn has her mother's clown, plants to remind them of the passion that they found together, dogs' handprints, lights to bring them home, skulls and candles. Karen, her departed son, left the gift of having the deepest and most profound love and joy that she will ever know. she does say it's hard to see it as a gift sometimes, though. And lastly, Susan, her dog's old collar and leash, what's missing is her smell on them.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, so much. I really appreciate your vulnerability and your sharing. Do you want to read that, Sarah?
Yes. Aine wrote in, they wrote a sentence from a song that he sent a few months before their ex died. And they also painted the flag of the country where they met.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes, so there's so many ways, and thank you all for sharing, and hopefully it's sparking your ideas. So many ways to do it. Because I was a Waldorf teacher, for those of you who are familiar with Waldorf, we have nature tables at school that change with the seasons. And so I find that my altars also change with the seasons. Often people will include things from holiday traditions on their altars, which is really lovely. I know, especially as we're approaching, now I'm going to start crying, as we're approaching Thanksgiving and then Hanukkah and Christmas and Kwanzaa and all the different winter, Children's Day, all the different winter holidays, that really brings up so much for us in terms of missing people who are no longer with us, or missing situations or relationships. And I definitely find comfort in whoever said they have 17 altars. I have altars all over my house, but I really find comfort in having a special dedicated space on the dining room table for it, to bring them into the holiday, to bring them into the home with the family. And I will say, and this is going to be the opposite of about the altar, but I'm just moved to say it right now. I feel like my altar that is mine is in my space that I use for myself, and it's kind of a personal thing. But the things that I have downstairs or at the dining room table, I very much include my friends, my children, other people, to experience those that I'm honoring. And so setting the table with a little altar and speaking about my sister, speaking about my parents, speaking about the people that are not there to me, is a different kind of altar, but it's an acknowledgement and an honoring. And it's also an honoring of me, because it's the truth of who I am and who is not with me. And as Aine said, how I've changed and how I've grown and how I'm a different person than I was before I had all these losses. So, yeah, so I wanted to give folks a chance to I just wanted to say one more thing about the altar and how it changes. Is just as we can get frozen in our grief. I'll say that again. Just as we can get stuck or frozen in our grief, I believe for me, it's really important to have things that change on my altar. That's why I have a candle that I light and blow out, because I'm setting the stage, I'm dropping in, and then I'm letting it go and releasing that moment. That is why I often have fresh flowers on my altar, so that there is a stage where those fresh flowers are no longer alive and I can take them off and maybe put new ones on, or bulbs that are blooming is a really lovely thing to have, to watch that growth and change. But for me, it helps me not stay so stuck in that concrete moment, that there's a flow to it. So just an idea. So I wondered if anyone wanted to say or ask anything else before I am going to actually read the poem that we read at my sister's memorial. And yeah. Sarah, I can't quite track what's happening. If you want to just share anything else.
No, just lots of lovely feedback for you. Love that, excellent idea. All of those sorts of things. And a lot of thank you for your vulnerability and storytelling. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you.
One
Yes.
question just came in. Can the altars be outside?
I love that. Thank you. What a beautiful question. And that's what I forgot to mention at the beginning. Altars can be anywhere. And actually, now I'm going to cry just thinking about it. One of the most beautiful altars that we created after my sister died, it was spring in Rhode Island, is we made this beautiful altar outside in her backyard. And it was full of flowers, and we made like not a labyrinth, but like a mandala, and it was so beautiful. And we would go and sit there, and then we just let it disappear. And that was really nurturing and supportive, especially for certain members of the family that maybe wouldn't necessarily want to do that. And you can create altars anywhere. You can create altars outside, places that you want to go to. They can be big, they can be really tiny. I've had an altar that was in a little I don't know how to pronounce it, Altoid tin, like literally that little, so that I could have it with me, so I could travel with it. So your altars can be any size, anywhere, any shape. Yeah. Dee Dee says she has a traveling altar. Yeah, wonderful. Beautiful. All right, well, I'm going to read this poem. And I now can read it. Tattoos. Yeah. Tattoos. And yes, Sarah will use, Susan had a book that she wants to share. So thank you so much. And I have heard, I have a friend, Molly, who had in her tattoo are some of the ashes in the ink. So yes, thank you. Thank you. All right, so this poem does not have, well, it has an author, but we don't know who it is. I'll try to do it without crying. When I die, if you need to weep, cry for your brother or sister walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not on your mind. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands, by letting bodies touch bodies, and by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It was literally such an honor to spend time with you, to share my sister. I'm going to get closer so you can see. That's only part of it, but that is my altar. And I wish you all much love and a beautiful afternoon, lunchtime. And I hope we meet again someday. And Sarah will put my contact information in the chat. Much love.
Okay, thank you so much, Nancy, for that beautiful workshop and sharing your whole heart with us. It is so much appreciated, and you just have a beautiful way with holding this space. So thank you from, I know, not only myself, but everyone that will benefit from this conversation. I have shared Nancy's contact information in the chat. You can also find her on GSN's website or the lobby where the event notes are. The book, really quickly, that was shared as a resource is called Morning Altars by Day Schildkret, something like that. And I will also include that in our resources when we follow up after each day.
Awesome.
But thank you all so much. Please take the next 40 minutes to take care of yourselves, get outside, eat, wash your hands, shower, whatever feels right to you. And our next session will begin at 12:30. That will be back with Wendy on grieving in community, and we will see you all then. If you don't mind, please exit out of this meeting and go back to the lobby space, and we'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.